Hi, guys. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight. Today I'm going to continue reading The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks. I also have some thunder sounds going on in the background. Let me know if you like that. I'm drinking some lemonade mixed with a little bit of champagne, because why not? It's the weekend. And I also have my Good Vibes candle by Potch Candle Company, my favorite brand. Not sponsored, I just genuinely love them. So why don't we light it and begin? He started to run the numbers in his head, then stopped. He knew he'd spent almost his entire savings on the house and would have to find a job again soon, but he pushed the thought away and decided to enjoy the remaining months of restoration without worrying about it. It would work out for him, he knew. It always did. Besides, thinking about money usually bored him. Early on, he learned to enjoy simple things that couldn't be bought, and he had a hard time understanding people who felt otherwise. It was another trait he got from his father. Clem, his hound dog, came up to him then and nuzzled his hand before lying down at his feet. "Hey, girl, how are you doing?" he asked as he patted her head, and she whined softly, her soft, round eyes peering upward. A car accident had taken her leg, but she still moved well enough and kept him company on quiet nights like these. He was 31 now, not too old, but old enough to be lonely. He hadn't dated since he'd been back here, hadn't met anyone who remotely interested him. It was his own fault, he knew. There was something that kept a distance between him and any woman who started to get close, something he wasn't sure he could change even if he tried. And sometimes, in the moments right before sleep came, he wondered if he was destined to be alone forever. The evening passed, staying warm, nice. Noah listened to the crickets and the rustling leaves, thinking that the sound of nature was more real and aroused more emotion than things like cars and planes. Natural things gave back more than they took, and their sounds always brought him back to the way a man was supposed to be. There were times during the war, especially after a major engagement, when he had thought often about these simple sounds. "It'll keep you from going crazy," his father had told him the day he'd shipped out. "It's God's music, and it'll take you home." He finished his tea, went inside, found a book, then turned on the porch light on his way back out. After sitting down again, he looked at the book. It was old, the cover was torn, and the pages were stained with mud and water. It was Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, and he had carried it with him throughout the war. It had even taken a bullet for him once. He rubbed the cover, dusting it off just a little. Then he let the book open randomly and read the words in front of him. "This is thy hour, old soul, thy free flight into the wordless. Away from books, away from art, the day erased, the lesson done. Thee fully forth emerging, silent, gazing, pondering the themes thou lovest best, night, sleep, death, and the stars." He smiled to himself. For some reason, Whitman always reminded him of Newbern, and he was glad he'd come back. Though he'd been away for 14 years, this was home, and he knew a lot of people here, most of them from his youth. It wasn't surprising. Like so many southern towns, the people who lived here never changed. They just grew a bit older. His best friend these days was Gus, a 70-year-old black man who lived down the road. They had met a couple of weeks after Noah bought the house, when Gus had shown up with some homemade liquor and Brunswick stew, and the two had spent their first evening together getting drunk and telling stories. Now Gus would show up a couple of nights a week, usually around 8. With 4 kids and 11 grandchildren in the house, he needed to get out of the house now and then, and Noah couldn't blame him. Usually Gus would bring his harmonica, and after talking for a little while, they'd play a few songs together. Sometimes they played for hours. He'd come to regard Gus as family. There really wasn't anyone else, at least not since his father died last year. He was an only child. His mother had died of influenza when he was 2, and though he had wanted to at one time, he had never married. But he had been in love once, that he knew. Once and only once, and a long time ago, and it had changed him forever. Perfect love did that to a person, and this had been perfect. Coastal clouds slowly began to roll across the evening sky, turning silver with the reflection of the moon. As they thickened, he leaned his head back and rested it against the rocking chair. His legs moved automatically, keeping a steady rhythm, and as he did most evenings, he felt his mind drifting back to a warm evening like this 14 years ago. It was just after graduation, 1932, the opening night of the News River Festival. The town was out in full, enjoying barbecue and games of chance. It was humid that night. For some reason, he remembered that clearly. He arrived alone, and as he strolled through the crowd, looking for friends, he saw Finn and Sarah, 2 people he'd grown up with, talking to a girl he'd never seen before. She was pretty, he remembered thinking, and when he'd finally joined them, she looked his way with a pair of hazy eyes that kept on coming. "Hi," she'd said simply as she offered her hand. "Finley's told me a lot about you." An ordinary beginning, something that would have been forgotten had it been anyone but her. But as he shook her hand and met those striking emerald eyes, he knew before he'd taken his next breath that she was the one he could spend the rest of his life looking for, but never find again. She seemed that good, that perfect, while a summer wind blew through the trees. From there, it went like a tornado wind. Finn told him she was spending the summer in New Bern with her family because her father worked for R.J. Reynolds, and though he only nodded, the way she was looking at him made his silence seem okay. Finn laughed at them because he knew what was happening, and Sarah suggested they get some cherry cokes, and the 4 of them stayed at the festival until the crowds were thin and everything closed up for the night. I'm going to take a drink break. They met the following day, and the day after that, and they soon became inseparable. Every morning but Sunday, when he had to go to church, he would finish his chores as quickly as possible, then make a straight line to Fort Totten Park, where she'd be waiting for him. Because she was a newcomer and hadn't spent time in a small town before, they spent their days doing things that were completely new to her. He taught her how to bait a line and fish the shallows for largemouth bass, and took her exploring through the backwoods of the Croatian forest. They rode in canoes and watched summer thunderstorms, and to him it seemed as though they'd always known each other. But he learned things as well. At the town dance in the tobacco barn, it was she who taught him how to waltz and do the Charleston. And though they stumbled through the first few songs, her patience with him eventually paid off, and they danced together until the music ended. He walked her home afterward, and when they paused on the porch after saying goodnight, he kissed her for the first time and wondered why he had waited as long as he had. Later in the summer, he brought her to this house, looked past the decay, and told her that one day he was going to own it and fix it up. They spent hours together talking about their dreams, his of seeing the world, hers of being an artist, and on a humid night in August, they both lost their virginity. When she left 3 weeks later, she took a piece of him and the rest of the summer with her. He watched her leave town on an early rainy morning, watched through eyes that hadn't slept the night before, then went home and packed a bag. He spent the next week alone on Harker's Island. Noah ran his hands through his hair and checked his watch. 8:12. He got up and walked to the front of the house and looked up the road. Gus wasn't in sight, and Noah figured he wouldn't be coming. He went back to his rocker and sat again. He remembered talking to Gus about her. The first time he mentioned her, Gus started to shake his head and laugh. "So that's the ghost you've been running from." When asked what he meant, Gus said, "You know, the ghost, the memory. I've been watching you, working all day and night, slaving so hard you barely have time to catch your breath. People do that for 3 reasons. Either they're crazy or stupid or trying to forget. And with you, I knew you were trying to forget. I just didn't know what." He thought about what Gus had said. Gus was right, of course. Newbern was haunted now, haunted by the ghost of her memory. He saw her in Fort Trotton Park, their place, every time he walked by. Either sitting on the bench or standing by the gate, always smiling, blonde hair softly touching her shoulders, her eyes the color of emeralds. When he sat on the porch at night with his guitar, he saw her beside him, listening quietly as he played the music of his childhood. He felt the same when he went to Gaston's drugstore, or to the Masonic Theater, or even when he strolled downtown. Everywhere he looked, he saw her image, saw things that brought her back to life. It was odd, he knew that. He had grown up in Newbern, spent his first 17 years here. But when he thought about Newbern, he seemed to remember only the last summer, the summer they were together. 1 second. Had to do a drink break. Other memories were simply fragments, pieces here and there of growing up, and few, if any, evoked any feeling. He had told Gus about it one night, and not only had Gus understood, but he had been the first to explain why. He said simply, "My daddy used to tell me that the first time you fall in love, it changes your life forever, and no matter how hard you try, the feeling never goes away. This girl you've been telling me about was your first love, and no matter what you do, she'll stay with you forever." Noah shook his head, and when her image began to fade, he returned to Whitman. He read for an hour, looking up every now and then to see raccoons and possums scurrying near the creek. At 9:30, he closed the book, went upstairs to the bedroom, and wrote in his journal, including both personal observations and the work he'd accomplished on the house. 40 minutes later, he was sleeping. Clem wandered up the stairs, sniffed him as he slept, and then paced in circles before finally curling up at the foot of his bed. Let's see how much is left in this chapter. These are very long chapters. Okay. I'll read one more section. Earlier that evening, and 100 miles away, she sat alone on the porch swing of her parents' home, one leg crossed beneath her. The seat had been slightly damp when she sat down. Rain had fallen earlier, hard and stinging, but the clouds were fading now, and she looked past them, toward the stars, wondering if she'd made the right decision. She'd struggled with it for days, and had struggled some more this evening, but in the end, she knew she would never forgive herself if she let the opportunity slip away. Lon didn't know the real reason she'd left the following morning. The week before, she'd hinted to him that she might want to visit some antique shops near the coast. "It's just a couple of days," she said, "and besides, I need a break from planning the wedding." She felt bad about the lie, but knew there was no way she could tell him the truth. Her leaving had nothing to do with him, and it wouldn't be fair of her to ask him to understand. It was an easy drive from Raleigh, slightly more than 2 hours, and she arrived a little before 11. She checked into a small inn downtown, went to her room, and unpacked her suitcase, hanging her dresses in the closet and putting everything else in the drawers. She had a quick lunch, asked the waitress for directions to the nearest antique stores, then spent the next few hours shopping. By 4:30, she was back in her room. She sat on the edge of the bed, picked up the phone, and called Lon. He couldn't speak long. He was due in court, but before they hung up on the phone, she gave him the phone number for where she was staying and promised to call the following day. Good, she thought, while hanging up the phone. Routine conversation, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to make him suspicious. She'd known him about 4 years now. It was 1942 when they met, the world at war and America 1 year in. Everyone was doing their part, and she was volunteering at the hospital downtown. She was both needed and appreciated there, but it was more difficult than she'd expected. The first waves of wounded young soldiers were coming home, and she spent her days with broken men and shattered bodies. When Lon, with all of his easy charm, introduced himself at a Christmas party, she saw him exactly what she needed. She saw in him exactly what she needed. Someone with confidence about the future and a sense of humor that drove all her fears away. He was handsome, intelligent, and driven, a successful lawyer 8 years older than she, and he pursued his job with passion, not only winning cases, but also making a name for himself. She understood his vigorous pursuit of success, for her father and most of the men she met in her social circle were the same way. Like them, he'd been raised that way, and in the caste system of the South, the family name and accomplishments were often the most important consideration in marriage. In some cases, they were the only consideration. Though she had quietly rebelled against this idea since childhood and had dated a few men best described as reckless, she found herself drawn to Lon's easy ways and had gradually come to love him. Despite the long hours he worked, he was good to her. He was a gentleman, both mature and responsible, and during those terrible periods of the war when she needed someone to hold her, he never once turned her away. She felt secure with him and knew he loved her as well, and that was why she had accepted his proposal. Thinking these things made her feel guilty about being here, and she knew she should pack her things and leave before she changed her mind. 1 second, I'm going to take another drink break. She had done it once before, long ago, and if she left now, she was sure she would never have the strength to return here again. She picked up her pocketbook, hesitated, and almost made it to the door. but coincidence had pushed her here, and she put the pocketbook down, again realizing that if she quit now, she would always wonder what would have happened, and she didn't think she could live with that. She went to the bathroom and started a bath. After checking the temperature, she walked to the dresser, taking off her gold earrings as she crossed the room. She found her makeup bag, opened it, and pulled out a razor and a bar of soap, then undressed in front of the bureau. She had been called beautiful since she was a young girl, and when she was naked, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her body was firm and well proportioned, breasts softly rounded, stomach flat, legs slim. She'd inherited her mom's high cheekbones, smooth skin, and blonde hair, but her best feature was her own. She had eyes like ocean waves, as Lon liked to say. Taking the razor and soap, she went to the bathroom again, turned off the faucet, set a towel where she could reach it, and stepped in gingerly. She liked the way a bath relaxed her, and she slipped lower into the water. The day had been long, and her back was tense, but she was pleased she had finished shopping so quickly. She had to go back to Raleigh with something tangible, and the things she had picked out would work fine. She made a mental note to find the names of some other stores in the Beaufort area, then suddenly doubted she would need to. Lon wasn't the type to check up on her. She reached for the soap, lathered up, and began to shave her legs. As she did, she thought about her parents and what they would think of her behavior. No doubt they would disapprove, especially her mother. Her mother had never really accepted what had happened in the summer they'd spent here, and wouldn't accept it now, no matter what reason she gave. She soaked a while longer in the tub before finally getting out and toweling off. She went to the closet and looked for a dress, finally choosing a long yellow one that dipped slightly in the front, the kind of dress that was common in the South. She slipped it on and looked in the mirror, turning from side to side. It fit her well and made her look feminine, but she eventually decided against it and put it back onto the hanger. Instead, she found a more casual, less revealing dress and put that on. Light blue with a touch of lace. It buttoned up the front, and though it didn't look quite as nice as the first one, it conveyed an image she thought would be more appropriate. She wore little makeup, just a touch of eyeshadow and mascara to accent her eyes. Perfume next, not too much. She found a pair of small hooped earrings, put those on, then slipped on the tan, low-heeled sandals she had been wearing earlier. She brushed her blonde hair, pinned it up, and looked into the mirror. No, it was too much, she thought, and she let it back down. Better. When she was finished, she stepped back and evaluated herself. She looked good, not too dressy, not too casual. She didn't want to overdo it. After all, she didn't know what to expect. It had been a long time, probably too long, and many different things could have happened, even things she didn't want to consider. She looked down and saw her hands were shaking, and she laughed to herself. It was strange. She wasn't normally this nervous. Like Lon, she had always been confident, even as a child. She remembered that it had been a problem at times, especially when she dated, because it had intimidated most of the boys her age. She found her pocketbook and car keys, then picked up the room key. She turned it over in her hand a couple of times, thinking, "You've come this far. Don't give up now," and almost left then, but instead sat on her bed again. She checked her watch. Almost 6 o'clock. She knew she had to leave in a few minutes. She didn't want to arrive after dark, but she needed a little more time. "Damn," she whispered. "What am I doing here? I shouldn't be here. There's no reason for it." But once she said it, she knew it wasn't true. There was something here. If nothing else, she would have her answer. She opened her pocketbook and thumbed through it until she came to a folded-up piece of newspaper. After taking it out slowly, almost reverently, being careful not to rip it, she unfolded it and stared at it for a while. This is why. she finally said to herself, "This is what it's all about." And that is where I'm going to leave off. I hope that you enjoyed this reading. I'm sorry for leaving it off on a little cliffhanger, but I hope you have a wonderful night. I will see you in my next video. Let me know in the comments if you like the background noise, and also if you have any other book recommendations or just video recommendations in general. If you could also subscribe, that would be amazing. I also have an Instagram. It's at Lavender Whispers. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight, and I will see you next time. Good night.